Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. What do you say when you have only 8 seconds? Maybe Paul Hellman can help us. Paul, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with you, Bill.
Paul, what's this about 8 seconds? Why do we have an 8-second limit?
Yeah, I think it's due to a whole lot of things. And of course, probably the first culprit is just electronics. Everybody's got a phone. And if you watch people, we're all really impatient. And we want information and we want it now. And that means that we're flooded with information. So the question becomes, how do you cut through the clutter? If there's all this information coming in all the time, how do you cut through the clutter and actually get heard?
And when I first saw that you talked about an 8-second, and I think you say our time span, that's actually shorter than a goldfish has or something?
Yeah, goldfish have a 9-second attention span. So goldfish are beating us, which is really kind of depressing.
I can see that as your new brand. I don't know if you put out caps with your book title on it, et cetera, but the goldfish and the guy standing next to him and somehow getting in that 8-second limit. And it is depressing to think we can't think longer. But as I went through your book, I said, my God, you're exactly right. I don't like things that take too long. If a commercial doesn't hit me, I'm walking out of the room or I'm changing the channel. If a show doesn't grab my interest for whatever reason. And you and I talked, and what a difference. You had a different title originally, or your publisher did. And you are the one who came up with, you've got 8 seconds for the title of your book. Is that right?
Yeah, because I think what captures people, and this is a lot of the work that I do a lot of work helping, either coaching people or putting on workshops, speaking engagements, so forth. And one of the things that I'm always focused on is, what's your first line? So the title of a book is like the first line. And you've got 8 seconds is a hook. And it's a hook because it's a problem. And I actually tested a number of titles. I write a regular tip that goes out to thousands of people. I've been doing that for about 10 years. And so I thought, the publisher and I were negotiating the title of the book. And I said, okay, give me a few of your titles and I'll do a market test for you. So I did. And 8 seconds, one person wrote back and said, I would definitely buy a book called You've Got 8 Seconds because I want to know 8 seconds till what? 8 seconds till the world blows up? What's the 8 seconds thing? So it's a problem. You've got 8 seconds sounds like a problem, and problems hook attention.
I was going to say, it grabs your attention, and it did with me, and that's why you and I are doing this show together. And if you had used one of those other titles, who knows? It may not have grabbed me at the time. We may not have connected, et cetera, et cetera. The good and the bad. Now, I look at you, and I know I have 8 seconds, or if I go into a store, I see the receptionist or the salesman or saleswoman. But they're doing the same thing to me, right? They're looking at me in 8 seconds.
Well, I think that's a really important observation. And for anybody listening, I would ask you just to test this. Check your own experience when you're meeting somebody, whether it's at work or outside of work, doesn't really matter. How long does it take for you to form an impression? And we all know, we've all heard about first impressions and how sticky first impressions are. But if you start paying attention to how quickly you and I mean, as human beings, it's adaptive. Even before the flood of information in the information age, it's adaptive. If you think of us as kind of like animals, it's very adaptive to size up other creatures quickly. So that's just built into our DNA.
I even used to do it. I remember in the work world, I would be on the phone, and within a few seconds, I would say to myself, this office is going to give me a favorable decision. Either the person is in, or they agree with my position, or they're going to say, no, you can't have that by the 4th of the month or the 23rd or whatever it is I wanted. Why was I calling them? And usually within 3 or 4 seconds, just based on the tone of, now this is either the secretary or the receptionist in these days, just based on his or her voice, I could kind of tell which way this conversation was going to go.
Absolutely. And again, I would suggest to listeners, just think about the last time you had a problem, borrowing from what you just said, Bill. Think about the last time that you had a problem with a store or some organization, and you called up and you're speaking to somebody in customer service. Just as you said, in seconds, is this person, number one, is this person knowledgeable? And number two, is this person committed to helping me? And voice is really, really important. I always tell people I'm very happily married. I've been married for a long time. Pre-COVID, when my wife and I were both typically out of the house during the day, at the end of the day, when we would get back home, all my wife needed to say was one word. And from that one word, I knew two really important things. And the word was hello. And from that one word, the two things that I knew were, number one, what kind of a day my wife just had, and number two, what kind of an evening I was about to have. And if my wife were on the show, she could say the exact same thing about me and the way that I said hello, right? So that's not about the word hello. That's about, now we're talking about tone of voice, which is, of course, important.
That's great. Now, I want our audience to know, while you're talking about this and we're having fun about it, not only is it obviously very, very true in real life, but you actually advise major corporations, companies, businesses on this and instruct them what to look for and how people are going to react to their employees. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah. And even in COVID, I've been doing my work during COVID has all been virtual. Normally, I'm out doing workshops and speaking engagements and one-to-one consulting, but now I'm doing all those things virtually, which is a whole nother thing, is how do you communicate effectively on Zoom? Because, we were just talking about body language. Bill, if you and I were in the same room, in terms of eye contact, we would be looking at each other. People actually study this stuff. We'd be looking at each other 3 to 5 seconds. That's normal eye contact. 3 to 5 seconds. And the only exceptions are if you're having an intimate candlelit dinner, a romantic dinner with somebody, or you're face to face with a really experienced sociopath. Those are the only exceptions to the 3 to 5 seconds rule in terms of normal face-to-face conversation. But now we go to Zoom. And there's the sense that you're supposed to be looking at your screen the entire time. So that's totally different. And also the other thing that's so crazy about that is, like right now where you and I are on Zoom, if I look at you, your experience is that I'm actually looking a little bit down. So to create the impression that I'm actually looking at you, I can't look at you. I have to look at the camera, in this case on my laptop, which is a little tiny white dot on the top of the camera. And if I look at the dot, I'm not looking at you, but your experience would be that I am looking at you. So my solution to all that is just to toggle back and forth. Sometimes I'm looking at the person, sometimes I'm looking at the white dot. But it's just another example of how important body language is. And now what COVID, the sort of plot twist that has come with all of that through COVID.
It makes for a lot of new, and of course that's great for your business because that's a whole new chapter in it. You were talking about your wife starting out before, how you knew based on one word. Your next book could be The 8-Second Marriage, that once you get that one word, whether it means hello with a warm greeting, hello like where have you been, or hello I never want to see you again. And I think you and Dr. Phil should team up and you'd have something good going.
Well,
before we go further,
sure. If I can just share a quick story. So I was doing, in one of my workshops, I actually do a whole workshop just on stories. Stories how can you tell a story for a business audience? I do about 12. I have about 12 different programs. They're all about communication, and they all deal with this 8-second problem. How do you capture and hold attention? But in any event, in one of the workshops, I was teaching people how do you can design a very compelling story. And part of it, again, part of the trick is your first line. Does the first line of the story hook people? Anyway, so one person raises their hand. He wants to volunteer a first line. And it was one of the better first lines that I've ever heard. And it has to do with marriage. And he said, after only 2 days of marriage, I no longer recognize my wife. Now, after only 2 days of marriage, I no longer recognize my wife. You're definitely going to hear that story. And he's got more. It's the point of 8 seconds is it's not like you and I have to be speaking in 8-second sound bites, but you do have to be concerned about the flood of information and how you can cut through the clutter and stand out. So after only 2 days of marriage is just a winning start. And normally when I'm helping people with stories, we don't spend a whole lot of time on the middle. The idea of the middle is just get from the first line to the last line as quickly as you possibly can. But in this case, I just had to ask him. I said, so wait, was this one of these deals where you go out to a bar one night, you have too much to drink, and then somehow you wake up the next day, you're married, and you're in Las Vegas? And he said, no. We knew each other for 10 years before we got married. So that's a compelling first line, right? Like
it's great. That should be a contest. I'm thinking a new show, kind of the 8-second goldfish instead of the Shark Tank. Just people coming out with lines that really draw you in. I'm going to give you my favorite in a second, but at this point in the show, I'd like to remind our audience that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Paul Hellman. He's the author of You've Got 8 Seconds. Paul, where can we get this book? And is there a website where we can find out more?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So the easiest place to get the book is on Amazon. And on Amazon, the book is in print. It's in Kindle. And there's also an audio version that I recorded, which was a very interesting experience. The book is not that long. It's less than 200 pages, but I spent 3 days in a recording studio doing the audio version of this. So the short answer is Amazon, print, Kindle, audio, all available.
And again, we'll ask you again later in the show if our audience didn't get a chance to get that down. Now, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories. I met someone who wanted to be on the show, and I said, what's your secrets of success? And very sweet, nice lady, she looked at me and she said, I've become successful by my false advertising. And I looked at her for the punchline. She smiled at me and she laughed and she said, that's what my husband said to tell you. I said, well, why would you tell me that? She said, because I make garments that compress the human body. In other words, she makes people look thinner, and right. It's stylish. And when she said that, just the lead in, it made me ask the next question naturally, why, how. I know nothing about it. So we got into a big discussion, and she wound up doing a show on how false advertising, of course, she wasn't really misleading people. What she was doing was making garments that made people more attractive, more socially pleasing, looking more physically fit. But it was a great opening line. It got her on the show.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Opening lines really, really matter. I'll give you one more. This again was during a workshop working on stories. This is probably I call this the best and worst first line that I ever heard. And the line was, my colleague was a murderer. And this was a workshop that I was doing in London. And the woman who volunteered this first line, it was a full day workshop, and the woman had been quiet the entire morning. This was right after lunch. And we were working on stories. And she said, my colleague was a murderer. So, of course, the first question is, is that literal or are you being metaphorical? My colleague was just really a horrendous person. No, literal. Now, that was the best and worst first line that I ever heard. It was the best first line because oh my God, you got to hear the whole story, right? Like what happened? It was the worst first line because when you're doing a story, another really important part is what is the last line of your story? What's the point of your story? And if you're talking to a business audience, you need to have a business relevant point. The problem with that first line, as good as it was as a hook, it was so dramatic that it would crowd out. Nobody would ever remember what the point of the story was, right? All they're going to remember is, oh my God, this poor woman worked with somebody who's now in jail for murder. When I asked her what her last line was, and she was young, she was under 30. So I think this was her first work experience post-college. And she said, well, my last line is, don't trust anybody. And I said, well, you can't really use that if you're talking to a business audience. How's that going to work? You know, you tell this unbelievable, gripping story, but then the punchline is don't trust anybody. So that's not going to play well to a business. I mean, you're sitting at a table. Let's say you're in the audience. You're sitting at a table, and you go, the person to your left, the person to your right. Don't trust any of them.
No, that's a great point, because who are you, like you say, who are you talking to? If you're talking at a cocktail party, it's fun. But if you're telling them not to trust, then why should I buy my car from you or from my insurance from Joe or Mary, who's sitting next to you? I'm not trusting them because of the story you just told me.
Yeah. So the larger point that I'm making is, because all of my work is with executives and professional business people. And it's always about how can you cut through the clutter? How can you not only say it, but how can you get heard? And then not just heard, but remembered. And then not just heard and remembered, but results. How do you get heard, remembered, and get results? And so for a business audience, you've got 8 seconds. So there's always what's the sizzle. If it were a story, the sizzle would be the hook, the first line. But there's also what's the stake, which would be in a story, that would be what's the point. So it's not enough just to be entertaining. You also have to make sure that you're presenting value, that you're giving your audience actionable information.
Paul, you start out, chapter 1 is very brief. And it again, like everything else in your book, it certainly hit me. And in probably 2 seconds, say less. Do most of us overtalk, to talk too much?
Well, some of us overtalk. I'm not sure if I'm guilty of that during the show. Some of us definitely overtalk. Some of us, I also work with people who have the opposite problem. A lot of the work, sometimes one of the 12 things I do is a program called Your Point, with a question mark. And I coach people on how can you get to the point faster? How can you cut all the clutter from whatever it is that you're going to say? We tend to fall in love with our information. And it's a little bit like a parent with their kids. We fall in love with our information and we assume, well, I love this information. You're going to love it too. So I'm just going to tell you everything. But to get back to what you were saying, Bill, and asking, there are also some of us that have the opposite problem, which is we talk too little. And there are a lot of people who will tell you that in business settings, that let's say they're at a meeting, and they feel some shyness, some discomfort at raising their hand and saying anything.
Is that a fear that they have, that they're going to be put down or mocked or something?
Yeah, it's, psychologists have identified for a long time something that gets called the inner critic, right? That voice inside your head that might be telling you, well, whatever you're about to say, that's not really important. That's not going to be useful. That's not really even interesting. So don't say anything. So we all have that voice, and it's a question of how loud and how dominant is it. Some people, you could call that the inner critic. You could call it the inner editor. Some of this has to do with extroverts versus introverts. So extroverts tend to think while they're speaking, and introverts are the exact opposite. They want to think first and then talk later. So you get that distinction.
Well, I have to talk now and let our audience once again know that they're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan, but the nice gentleman we're talking to today is Paul Hellman, Hellman. His book is You've Got 8 Seconds. Paul, where can we get the book and what is the website we should know about?
Yeah, the website is expresspotential.com. Expresspotential.com. And on that website, I've got some very fast videos, which I think would be very entertaining for your listeners.
And I'll commend you on that because they are, and that's what got me hooked and got you and I talking today. So.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bill. Yeah, I think they're close to 10, very short, 2-minute, and in each one, just like the book, I try to model the stuff that I'm teaching people and coaching people about. And then to get the book, Amazon is probably the easiest place, and the book is available in print, it's available in Kindle, and it's available in audio.
You cover all bases, so we have no excuse. And I will tell our audience, again, the world we're in today, once they start looking at the book, they're going to say, oh my God, he's right. Oh my gosh, this is true. You're going to know why you didn't buy that car, why you did buy that insurance, why you got stuck with that cable TV company. And you're going to find out how quickly we do make decisions. And it can be dating. It could be making friends, whether it's in school or clubs or a new church group, or in business, getting out and getting the sale, or just building up a little friendship with someone so that when you call their office, you can get through to the person you really want to speak to. Paul, are there some general rules you would tell our audience that, especially in this short soundbite economy, they should be aware of? You started out by saying talk less. Anything else we should know about? Yeah,
the book basically has 3 strategies. So again, the problem is you've got 8 seconds, people are flooded with information, how do you break through? And there are 3 main strategies that I, when I'm working with people, that I coach people on and train people on and so forth. So the first strategy, number 1, is focus. And part of focus is part of focus can be say less, part of focus is how do you design a message that is going to be irresistible to an audience? What is knowing what the single most important thing is, whether you're talking for 5 minutes or 5 hours, what's the single most important thing? So that's focus. The second thing is variety. That's the second strategy for getting attention. Variety works, and the way to think about that is how can you be slightly different? Slightly is an important word because, of course, there are a lot of ways you can be different that would capture attention, but they would be very career risky. So how can you be slightly different? In the book, for example, there's a chapter in the book called Presentation Tricks. And one of the presentation tricks is, what do you do? What's your first sentence? How can you be slightly different by not serving up the same old opening in a presentation? That's just one example. So first strategy is focus. Second is variety, or how to be slightly different. And then the third strategy is this mysterious thing called presence. Sometimes it's called executive presence. And people use this word a lot. They'll say this person has presence, this person doesn't have presence, but they never ever define it. And so what I do in this book and in my work is I take this word presence and say, here are 10 things, 10 specific, actionable things that will contribute to other people perceiving you as someone with presence. That's great because, again, as you said, that's what we all want. When someone walks in, we say, I want to be kind of included in her group or his group. They just command us. It would be, to use a national example, a Tom Brady walks in the room and you say, there's an outstanding quarterback, an athlete. You can feel it and you want to be around him. And just that little hint, I think, for most of us, because we think because we just got a medical degree or a law degree, we should be accepted and everybody should love what we have to say. And as I read your book, I'm saying, oh my gosh, I made this mistake. I made that mistake. And unfortunately for a lot of us,
we don't learn it till it's too late. And that could be age 22 or 25 when we've lost the opportunity to get that job or maybe make a business contact.
Yeah.
And it's such a simple book and so easy to adopt the rules you give us.
Yeah, and I can give you a quick example on this. So again,
please.
10 actions that would contribute to presence. You and I already had a conversation about nonverbal, so that's one of the 10, and that's a really important one. And that's about your voice and your body language and your facial expression. So that's one of the 10. And I'm not going to go through all 10, but let me just give you another one that's really simple, which is optics. And part of optics is, what are you doing on social media? And the example I want to give you is, I would say daily, and I'm sure you do too, Bill, I get several LinkedIn invitations. And they're all the same. And they're all the default LinkedIn invite, which is, I would like to join your network. Well, that is a great example of how you can differentiate yourself. The next time you send an invite for LinkedIn, don't send the default invite. That's how you're showing up for the first time. And of course, when I get those invites, I go, and I'm sure you do too, you go, well, who is this person and why do they want to connect with me? And so all it requires is maybe 5 minutes to just personalize it. And that will stand you apart from 99% of the people that are sending LinkedIn invites. So presence, yeah, Tom Brady walks into a room and has presence, but we don't want people to think, well, that's just something you either have or you don't have, you were born with it or you weren't. Presence is actionable. It's actionable.
Paul, you made it perfect. I want our audience to know that. Our guest today has been Paul Hellman. His book is You've Got 8 Seconds. Before we wrap up, Paul, tell us again the website.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. The website is expresspotential.com. That's expresspotential.com. expresspotential.com.
Thanks so much for the great advice today and for keeping it into the 8-second category. I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.